Okay. I think we're waiting for one more, is that right? I think we have a quorum. Is that right, Hannah? You're on mute, Hannah, if you're.
Yes, I think so.
All right, great. Okay. I think we have a spammer, if you don't mind. Okay. Do you mind, Hannah, were you able to remove Billy? You're muted still if you're saying anything. Okay.
Yes, I just removed him.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, thanks everyone. So just to start first, Hannah, any, I guess we can go through the excused absences we know of.
Yes, Michael Mormon, Sherry. Oh, very true. Okay, perfect. Suzanne, it's her birthday. And then Cherish.
Okay.
So I guess then only two.
Okay, great. All right, and then if anybody is willing to read the equity and land acknowledgement, I'll pull it up here. I would appreciate that.
I got you.
Thanks, go ahead.
We, as the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, want to begin this meeting by affirming BPAC's commitment to equity and racial justice. We would like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on lands that have served as the home for diverse Indigenous communities long before current governments were established here. We pay our respect to elders and members of these communities, both past and present, and recognize the harms of genocide and colonialism. We will make a conscious effort to reflect on the following questions as we advance through our business and contemplate changes in our community. And we recognize that achieving equity requires our commitment to an ongoing process. How can we seek to repair harm with our work and not erase history? How does our work impact vulnerability and safety of people who hold many intersecting marginalized identities, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, people with disabilities, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning people? How can we prioritize and center people in our decision-making? How can we be more responsive to local needs? How can our work build community, power, and shared decision-making?
Thank you, Mike. All right, so I think I don't see, well, I guess I'll leave it to you. Hannah, what's our updates on our new members and openings, if you don't mind filling us in again on that?
Yes, so we have a new member, Jeffrey. So excited to have you on the commission. I don't know if you want to say something. You have a background.
Just briefly, I served on BPAC between 2014 and 2016 when I was the DOST liaison. I see some familiar names and lots of new names. I'm delighted to be back on BPAC, and I hope that I can make a good contribution.
Great.
So very excited to have you on board. We do have several vacancies right now, and then starting in June 30th, we're going to be having even more. So right now we have the Duke liaison position that's accepting applications, and that's vacant. We also have the youth representative that is accepting applications and currently vacant. With that one, it's city, and so someone can have a stipend And then also there's no age criteria. So that's something to, even though it says youth, it doesn't have to be only a high schooler. I think we'd probably have someone who is maybe more attending things and stuff if it's in college, the person's in college. Then the other positions that we're going to be having open is the bicycle community that is representing the county. Another county one is senior advocacy. And then another county one is a disabilities advocacy, and all three of those are June 30th. And then the very last one is vacant August 31st, but applications will open in July 1st, and that is city recreation and urban trails and greenways. So we have a lot of positions to fill. Definitely please shoot them to any of your connections that you have. I've been trying to send emails, but I think there's a lot of institutional knowledge that's going to be lost when some of the people cycle off. And so we want to make sure we're as strong as we can be.
Yeah, and I'll also add, I think that's a great point about making sure we get sort of as much sort of advocacy out there in terms of getting new members on. I want to just mention, for those who have applied to the city role, their applications will remain in consideration, right, for future city roles, but not for county roles. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. They stay kind of just like in their system. And I got clarification. So I asked if they applied for one position, would it only stay eligible for that role? But at least the county commissioner, they had mentioned that it would just be open. So they would look at it and see if they would be maybe qualified for another role that opened. So I would say encourage people to just apply to both. And have
Both through the county and the city website.
exactly.
So, maybe we can, if folks want to, I don't have the links ready on hand, but we can get those links to people, I think, if we need by the end of the meeting.
I can put them in the chat.
Yeah, Mary Rose asks if there's a deadline for these applications. Do you know?
So not necessarily. Right now, the positions that are posted, they have the end of this month. But if someone's not selected, they just re-advertise it again. So it's basically it goes depending on city council's meeting agendas and then also the county commissioners, so their meeting cycle. But I mean, it'd be good to apply as soon as possible, but there's a lot of roles, so I don't know if we'll have all of them filled.
It did seem like end of June, there were a couple, right? So like probably there's going to be a cycle at the end of June. So getting in before that for sure is, I think, the first sort of round, I would guess.
Yeah. Right now, though, they're open till May 31st, even the ones that are where it's June.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Yeah, then I mean, end of May, it probably is the first round then. Ed, you had your hand up.
Exactly.
Yeah, I believe I'm currently the county disability advocacy seat at my end of, and I will be applying again. I'm eligible for one more term, so it's my intention to do that.
Yeah, sorry.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think Ed, you cut out from me, but I think it was only just me. Did you all get that okay? Okay.
It cut out for me too.
Okay, yeah. Ed, did you say that you're you may have a second term, or were you not sure?
I'm about to finish my first term. I came on and in 2018, and I spent 2 years filling out someone else's 3-year term, and that person only served 1 term. So I filled someone's 2 years of someone's 3-year term. Then I served. I'm ending my first 3-year term, and it's my understanding that I'm eligible for a second 3-year term, and I will be applying for that probably by the end of this week.
Okay.
To keep on going.
Okay, great. Yeah, hopefully you'll stay with us, Ed. But glad to hear that. I'll catch folks up on the chat just because and just I'll make sure that I keep up with it, but if I miss something in the chat, I want to make sure that it's spoken out loud as well. So just let me know if I miss something, but besides welcoming Jeffrey back, for those who knew him from before, Heidi was asking or saying it would be very relevant to understand if the county has more of a challenge filling its positions and filling them with residents who reflect the demographics of our community, since the county is currently not offering a stipend. So I guess that would be interesting if we have any information regarding whether the stipend is making a difference for folks applying more to the city positions than to county. I don't know off the top of my head, but maybe if we had numbers, that'd be good to kind of keep track of. And then, yeah, Hannah has just pasted in the open positions again, and I'll read them out again just for good measure. So Duke Liaison is currently accepting applications. That's a county role. Bicycle Community Advocate is sort of role is accepting applications. That one becomes vacant end of June. That's a county role. Senior Advocacy role is accepting applications and becomes vacant end of June. That's also a county role. The Youth Representative, no age criteria. Okay. That's, yeah, I don't remember what ended up there, but Youth Representative is a city role that's vacant and currently accepting applications. And then Recreation/Urban Trails and Greenways is accepting applications. Is that until July 1st? Is that what that is?
No,
the
that
city?
starts July 1st. So they start accepting applications 1 month in advance of the position cycling off for their term.
Yeah, I know folks, again, in the panel, or sorry, the guests that are not on the panel can't see the chat, and there's a link here to the county website. So if you want that, just open a Q&A and we'll drop that link as an answer.
The city website where it lists their openings lists 15 to 24 as an age range for the youth position. That's actually on the city website.
Yeah, I thought we did have the age restriction for the youth role. So I don't know where that list. I don't know, Hannah, where did you see the no age criteria?
That was from Dale's mouth.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but that's
All
good to
right.
hear. But I would still say, I think that we should be targeting not high schoolers. It should be college, because just from the experience so far.
Sure. Yeah, I think if we have more than one application, I'll be happy. Go ahead.
I think it just, that's why I was like under 24 or under 25. I think that's what most folks are trying to do, is just say under 25 or something like that, just to, because there's been a lot of boards who've added these seats and there's been a lot of conversation. I'm like, well, how young, and will high school kids be reliable, etc. So I think that's where it also lines up with how the Office of Youth does their work, which is up to 24, if I'm not mistaken. So it kind of just aligns with what else we're doing.
Yeah, Ideal mentioned as well the Office of Youth, and maybe Hannah, that's something, if we don't have any youth representative applications in the next few weeks, maybe we can reach out to them to see if we can sort of work with them to get more applicants.
Definitely. And I'd also like to bring up, Jeff, you mentioned in the email that you think a flyer would be helpful. I think that's a great idea. So if anyone would be willing to help create a flyer, or even start like emailing and reaching out to some organizations, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I just think because there's a lot of folks who don't know that there's openings. And a lot of the trails have information boards, neighborhood association information boards. I dropped off today at Bullseye Cycles, which is 2 blocks from my office. I dropped off the city and county announcement just to let them know that there are openings if they want to promote that to their staff or their customers. But I think the case is a lot of people don't even know that the commission exists or that there are openings. So the flyer might be a good way of getting the word out.
Yeah, maybe if we don't create a separate flyer, hopefully we can. We're hoping to create a flyer as well for these sort of events that are just to have some more sort of up-to-date material that we can give out on behalf of BPAC anyways. So kind of two birds with one stone there, maybe a little bit, if at all possible. But yeah, if anyone's willing to sort of help with that, feel free to sort of jump on that, or definitely come by. I think the Triple E committee could use, would probably be willing to take that on, but could use some help to kind of get coverage. I know they have a lot of stuff they're going through these days. Okay, well, anything else? Ed, your hand's still up, but I'm guessing it's from the old one, unless you still have something you wanted to add.
That's the old hand. I'll put it.
Got
there.
it, old hand, no problem. Anything else for the openings?
Does this information go to Bike Durham?
Good question.
There are a lot of people there.
Yeah, a very particular group of people that might very well be interested. That's a good idea. I don't know, Hannah, do you know?
No, I mean, so my understanding is it's the clerk's office that's supposed to be doing the outreach for when there's vacant positions. So far for doing, I've been trying to get a Duke liaison, and so it's been me just emailing people that I know. But yeah, my next step was gonna try to email John to see if this could go in a listserv. Or just one of their email blasts, but
Yeah,
I don't
mean,
have like, yeah. So if anyone does have connections or just contacts, yeah, because I don't know everyone everywhere.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it might be, I don't know what folks here might know Bike Durham better than I do, but like, I don't know how they feel about it, but it feels like reasonable to ask for a sort of small paragraph at the bottom of one of their monthly newsletters, to just sort of talk about, even maybe on an ongoing basis, kind of if we have other BPAC related sort of things to advertise. But okay, yeah, I'll Hannah, we can discuss this off afterwards. I think I'll have I'm writing some thoughts down that I'll get to you as well. So reaching out to Bike Durham is a good next step. All right, anything
There's a
else for
couple
the,
of questions
yeah.
in the other chat,
oh yeah,
in the
thanks.
Q&A chat. Somebody said Bike Durham is aware, and then somebody asked about the applications asking for a resume. It is just a regular work resume. It is nothing. You can do a CV if you need to. It doesn't. And then somebody, Paul Harvin. Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks, Javier, appreciate it. Yep, this is so good. Paul says he can ask for the openings to be included. Just Paul, feel free to just follow up if you end up being able to ask them. Just send me and Hannah an email. We'd appreciate it. And yeah, Mary Rose, I think that answers it. Regular resume. Thanks, Javiera. Okay, anything else on the openings? Okay, so let's move to, first of all, yeah, I didn't get a chance. Welcome, Jeffrey. Thanks for being part of the team here. I just focused on the openings, but I'm glad we have one filled at least. I think, yeah, I think it sounds like you know some folks here. Maybe actually, I'm gonna just kind of jump to adjusting the agenda. Alexander Cahill couldn't make it today. So we'll still do a kind of development review work session. I think it'll be useful for us to kind of, if at the very least, get sort of as much knowledge transfer from Dan as possible, but also just kind of introduce for ourselves, like for those of us who haven't been able to be a part of DevRev yet, kind of what that process looks like in detail, and kind of advertise internally to see who else might want to help with that process or ways we can change it. So we'll sort of, that'll be an adjustment for what the presentation is today. So we won't have an official formal presentation. With that in mind, though, I think we'll have an extra couple minutes, and I want to maybe just, while we have a new member, let's just go through and introduce ourselves. I probably could have done that at the top, but I think it'll be useful. We haven't done that in a few months, just to get everybody's names out there and kind of the years of experience. And so I'll just start with myself. My name's Dennis Idemir. I joined 2 years ago, pretty much, and I've been the chair since January. And I grew up in Durham, and I moved back just a couple of years ago. So I've had a sort of hiatus from North Carolina for a while, but I've been back for a couple of years. And then maybe Ed, if you can go next. You're muted, Ed, if you're talking, sorry.
All right. You hear me? No.
I heard you, Ed.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So I'm Ed Rizzuto. I've been on the commission since the spring of 2018. I'm currently vice chair and the disability advocacy seat appointed by the County Board of Commissioners. And I hope to serve another 3-year term.
Dennis, you're muted. No.
Sorry, thanks.
hear you now.
Yeah, all right, I'm back. Kai, go ahead.
Hey, Jeffrey, I'm Kai Monist. Member for just over a year. I've got experience with public transit and I work in NC State and I love riding my bike around Durham.
Thanks, Kai. Dan?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Dan Kleber. I've been on BPAC. I guess it's been close to 6 years now. My term ends. I think I'm one of those positions that Hannah mentioned earlier. I'm currently a chair of the Development Review Subcommittee, which we'll be talking about here shortly.
Thanks, Dan. Mike Mormon?
Hi, I'm Mike Mormon, and I chair the Plan Implementation and Evaluation Committee and work on DevRev. We've been doing joint committee meetings. Excuse me. And my term ends at the end of June, so an opening there.
Soon, Mike. We'll miss you. Scott?
Yeah, hi Jeff, this is Scott Carter. I think we may have served on BPAC in the past, but I've been on since last August or so, and I'm on the DevRev and PI committees.
Thanks. Mike Shepard?
Good evening. I'm Mike Shepard. I've been on the commission for probably around 2 years now. I'm on Triple E and I'm working as the secretary this session.
Thanks. Heidi?
Yeah, hey Jeff, good to see you again. Thanks for serving. I'm the liaison from the Board of County Commissioners.
Thanks, Heidi. Brian?
Hello, Brian Hawkins, at-large member for the city since last August. Lived in Durham off and on since 2006, and I spend as much time walking around as I can.
Thanks, Brian. Cesar?
Yeah, good evening, Cesar Castro. I think I've been with the commission for maybe a year now. I'm a urban planner, AICP urban planner. And like others, I love to bike and walk around Durham. So glad we have a new member. So
Thanks, Cesar. Javiera?
Oh, hey, I don't know if I'm on screen. I'm
Yep.
Javier Caballero. I am your Durham City Council liaison and have been the liaison, I don't know how many years now, I think since 2019. Good to be with you all, and thank you for those of you who have served as long as you have or have done several terms, and also to the folks who are new in the group.
Thanks, Javier. Landon?
Hi, this is Landon Balcom. I came on to BPAC at the same time as Brian did, and I participate in DevRev. Yep.
Thanks, Landon. And Hannah, you can round us out.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Hannah. I'm the bike and pedestrian planner with the city, and I've been the staff liaison for BPAC since January.
All right. Thanks, Hannah. I think I'm going to stop sharing just because I can't really see the group very well. And I think we got the agenda. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody. And we have a few attendees who are becoming regulars at this point. So I appreciate you all being here. And that'll sort of take us to our next section here, which is well, actually, sorry, we gotta go over the minutes. Any adjustments to last month's minutes for anyone? Hopefully you had a chance to look at those in the email. If there are no adjustments, we could take a motion to get those approved.
Well, I'll second the motion to have this approved.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from last month.
Okay.
Oh, that's the order.
Yeah, okay. Good. I think, yeah, never seen. I guess I implied a first, but seconded before the first. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Cesar. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Guys, okay. All opposed? Okay, none. Yep, minutes from April are approved. Let's sorry, let me pull up again. Yeah, so now we can move ahead to, I wanted to catch up on the Q&A. An anonymous attendee just asked, what are the qualifications, or what qualifications are pertinent to the open positions? I'll speak for myself. I think interest, willingness to kind of just interest in bike and pedestrian issues, I think sounded to me like it was sort of most important. You don't have to be a professional planner. I'm not, many of us are, but many of us aren't as well. And then I think just kind of a willingness to attend, a willingness to kind of take what we do in our commission and kind of put that out into work in Durham, I think is probably a really sort of pertinent part of the work. But I don't think there's any concrete qualifications that are required. And if anyone has anything to add to that, feel free.
I think there's also a misconception that you have to be like an avid biker, and you don't. You basically just have to be into like, okay, maybe you have to drive a car because of where you live or where you work, and that is fine. Like, it's more just that you're interested in alternatives to cars and different ideas around transit, and then advocating for those positions.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll speak for myself, but I even think it'd be great. You know, it's even better when we have folks who aren't, because a lot of us are bikers and are kind of we're probably a sort of self-selecting group that are willing to bike in suboptimal conditions more likely than most folks are. But we should really be thinking about, be the kind of person that would make, you know, more of Durham bikers, not necessarily just because, you know, we can bike on some sort of dangerous road or we have confidence to do that. You know, it'd be great if those who aren't very confident bikers could also come and be great advocates for making Durham more bikeable and more pedestrian friendly. So that's my opinion. Paul also asks about the email. Paul, I'll email you because I can't type an answer now that I said that. I think that I was going to answer it live. So anyway, I'll email you, Paul. Thanks.
I think another thing to keep in mind is it is the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. You know, one of the things, and I put this in my application, is I'm not a bike rider, but I commute via walking. And, you know, I put in the application that my previous time on BPAC, I often felt that the commission was heavily weighted towards bike riders. And I felt sometimes that I was not the token pedestrian, but I was the voice of the pedestrian side of the commission. So, you know, someone doesn't need to be a bike rider at all. And as Javier said, if you have an interest in making the city safer and better for walkers and bike riders, then I think you'd be a valuable asset to BPAC.
And I also want to shout out y'all's advocacy around better just transit. Like, you all have done a lot of work around, you know, the transportation plan and ensuring that the connectivity to buses is good. And so I think it's just really, there's an interest in transportation that is not a car. You are more than welcome to apply. Or if you're just curious, like you're like, I like this idea and I'd like to advocate for it, and maybe I don't know a ton, that is fine as well too.
Yeah, I agree with all those. Brian also says he hardly bikes, so all the more reason.
The last two times I biked was on a tandem with BPAC during the holiday parade. So I'm more on the pedestrian end of the seesaw. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're, yeah, just co-signing everything everyone's saying here. Okay, let's move, any public comments? I know we have some guests. I don't know if we have anyone who has specific public comments. I think we can give attendees speaking rights. If you have any public comments, I guess leave a queue in the Q&A. I'd be happy to give you some time to speak to those. I'll wait a moment for that. And folks on BPAC also, if you have any comments that specific issues you wanted to bring up today. Okay. Not seeing anything. We can always circle back if other sort of thoughts do come up. I know we have a number of sort of ongoing projects, for lack of a better word. So we'll sort of get to those through the meeting. Okay. Moving on from public comments. So for the presentation today, yeah, so as I mentioned, Alexander Cahill couldn't make it. I think maybe Javier knows, I guess City Council, there was a pretty late meeting last night. And in any case, hopefully we'll get a chance to talk with Alexander in a future meeting. We may just invite him to a DevRev meeting. We want to make sure that we get him in before Dan leaves, if at all possible, just to kind of, I think the sort of get the folks that have as much knowledge about our process as possible in on sort of a discussion there. But Dan, I think, was willing to kind of work with me, and I guess Mike Mormon's here too, so we can kind of do maybe a little bit of what our standard DevRev sessions are anyways, and go over, I think it'd be good maybe just to kind of go over, like you were discussing with beforehand, Dan, like one of our plans that we've gone over before. I did pull up what I think it was late last year at some point, made a cheat sheet, sort of just tried to kind of get some information onto a document that I'll share the link for, but I can screen share that as well. So we can do that maybe after or before we go over the development plan. Any sort of order you prefer, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, I was thinking maybe I could switch back and forth as we go through it, just because I like to refer to it to make sure I don't forget anything. You know, it's always a work in progress, a living document, but it's pretty helpful to fall back on. But yeah,
if you want to go ahead and we can just dive in, then I think
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess just a little bit of background for people who are new, and some people have been around for a while. They've heard about this a little bit every month, but basically what our committee does, subcommittee, is we the development review subcommittee, we often work in tandem with the plan implementation committee as well. But the development review committee, our main focus has always been on, I guess, just really evaluating plans that come in through the planning department. Those can be development plans, which is what we'll go into focus on here in a minute, site plans, or sometimes we look at street closures, and a lot of times we provide input on plans and the UDO itself. Like, what is the UDO? That's the Unified Development Ordinance. That's sort of the Bible that the city uses for all that's all the rules for how development's supposed to happen. And every once in a while, BPAC in our committee will provide commentary on that, or we'll be asked to provide commentary sometimes, which is really good. We've become kind of sort of a center of excellence in a way for development review. So sometimes planning will actually actively come to us and ask us for our opinions, or sometimes comprehensive plan questions or other policies. So those are kind of all the things that we work on. We used to look at site plans a lot. We just haven't had the bandwidth to look at those because there's so many of them. And site plans are what a developer has to provide to planning when they're allowed to build something somewhere. They have, like, if they want to build an apartment complex somewhere and it's zoned for apartment complex, they can just go straight to the site plan stage. Just in very simple terms, there are other things they might have to do, but and that's a really, really detailed plan. And whenever we made comments in those, we had to stick with what was in that UDO. You know, did you build the sidewalk in the right place? Did you do this the right way? The bike rack, all that stuff. And like I said, we haven't really had the bandwidth to look at those. We've kind of focused more on the development plans. And what those are is whenever you want to build something somewhere, let's say that apartment, I want to build an apartment somewhere, but it's zoned for light industrial, or it's zoned for rural residential or something else, I can't build it. I have to get permission from the city or the county to change the zoning map, to change it so that I can build that apartment there and get it zoned for like PDR or some other kind of zone that would allow that type of use. So a lot of times when you seek that approval, you have to send a plan to go along with it. And traditionally, there's always been what's been like a graphical development plan, which is what we'll look at, which actually shows like a plan that you can look at. And then there was text-based, which didn't involve a map or anything. And we weren't really allowed to comment on those that much. They've just recently changed the UDO to where there's now textual versus graphical. And I think with textual, we're able to provide some comments, but that's still kind of new. And that would be my question for Alexander whenever he kind of comes back in, like when do those start and what kind of comments can we make on those? And so comments is the thing. So when we look at a graphical development plan, it gives us an opportunity to look at it from the lens, from a bicycle pedestrian transit lens, and make sure that adopted policy is being, is being incorporated into the plan to some extent. And we'll ask, can you, to bring this development into greater conformance with adopted policy, could you please do this thing? And if they agree with that, then they'll put in what's called a committed element. They'll put in either something on, they'll write something down, or they'll put something on the plan, the map, to say, yes, we're going to do this. And if they agree to it, then they have to put it in. And then, once it becomes developed down the road, they have to follow that. But they can say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't have to. And we really can't make them, but it's just to remind them of what adopted policy is and how we think this development could be better for bicyclists, pedestrians, and transit riders if X, Y, and Z were incorporated. So that's probably to help. I'll just start showing a development plan that we looked at recently. See if I can share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so this is one that we looked at our meeting earlier this month. It's called Durham Summit. And the first thing we do is we just kind of dive into this page and see what's here. So you get a map. This is let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. It might make it a little bit easier to see, or too easy to see. So this is up between Duke and Roxborough Street. There's that mall, right, or the shopping center right there at Fairfield. This is kind of like right south of that. So it's between two really busy roads right next to a shopping center. And if you look at the site data table, that's what gives you some information about what it's zoned as now and what it is they're asking to zone it to. So right now it's zoned for office and industrial, but they want to put in some apartments, I think it is, or at least condos, something high density residential. So they can't go in and do that. They have to get the zoning map changed first. So that's what this is for. And this gives you some other information to kind of give you some ideas about what tier it's in. And here are those committed elements I talked about. Right now, they just have a few in here. And if, we've asked for a few things, and if they agree to it, then they'll put those in here. There's also some design commitments that sometimes we look at.
Do you know what the difference is between the text and the design commitments? I'm going to ask some questions I haven't had the sort of chance to ask before, but I'm curious if you know.
Yeah, I mean, we typically don't focus on the design commitments that much.
Okay.
We kind of focus more on the and I thought I read somewhere that they were going to simplify that so that they don't really have a distinction between that anymore. But it's kind of more, it's kind of like stuff that we don't focus on, like architecture, building materials, stuff like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
And okay, I'll go to the next page. And this is like kind of like current state. This shows you what it looks like now, like what's there. There's some buildings there, some parking lot. It's kind of this, I don't know what the shape is. There's a type of shape, but it's kind of like a zigzag. And what we will do is we'll go into Google Maps and, we'll bring up, Street View. We'll go in and look at sort of like what's there now, to get a better sense of what's here. Occasionally I'll go out to the site and then walk around to get a better sense of what's there. And then down here is the actual development plan. And it's like, well, there's not a lot of detail there, is there? Which is true. It's nothing like a site plan. A site plan has pages and pages and pages of intricate details. This is really, they're only required to show certain things, like if there's tree coverage areas that they have to preserve, like where they'll put in exits and entrances. So there's not a lot to go on. And, it doesn't show you where the buildings will go necessarily. So that's kind of a challenge, but they're not required to do that at this stage. They don't want to commit themselves to that much detail at this point in time. Let's see, sometimes there's other kernels of information over here that to look at, but this is pretty much all you get. And so this is, we kind of just sort of walk through and think through some things. This is when we start looking at the cheat sheet a little bit to just make sure we're not forgetting anything. Let's see if I remember where I put that. Yeah. So, we'll kind of think about sidewalk. The thing about sidewalks is the UDO requires them to put in sidewalks along major roads of their frontage and in some cases internal to their site. So we don't really ask them to do that at this stage because they'll have to do it anyway if it gets approved. But what we do look at and ask for is if like there's a gap in the sidewalk between like the shopping center and the apartment, if we will sometimes ask them like there's like 20 feet of missing sidewalk here, can you commit to building that even though it's off site? And they can say no, we're not going to do it, and that's fine. But we will sometimes ask if there's a critical gap that the UDO doesn't require them to do. We'll ask them, for pedestrian flow and for safety if they can do that. So that when it comes to frontages and sidewalks, that's typically what what we're limited to at this stage. Trying to think if there's anything else in here that we look at. I don't know, do we use bike lanes are typically, I think we kind of put that in here too. What we oftentimes will ask for is extra width for a future bike lane. They don't have to they don't have to stripe it as a bike lane. They don't have, it's just that if they're going to move, if they're going to change the street in some shape or form, put a new curb and gutter, change the ditch line, they should make it so that it fits the adopted policy. And a lot of times we'll refer to the what the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, has said. If they say that there should be bike lanes on this road, then we say, by the way, there should be bike lanes on this road, so that when you change the format of that road, that you're leaving that space. Because as we know, if they build it to a point where you can't put in a bike lane, someday the taxpayer has to tear up all that curb and gutter and redo that. It's just a huge expense. So why not build it right the first time? That's our position on that. And a lot of times the applicant will agree to that and say, yeah, well, it's in the Metropolitan Planning Organization comprehensive transportation plan. Let's just go ahead and do that. But because the UDO is not quite as firm on that in most tiers. So that's why we like to ask about it now, because once you get later on, they can say, yeah, I can't do it. So we like to kind of start the conversation now. And so that's kind of what we've done traditionally. I think in the future, we'd like to have a more detailed corridor plan, because right now the MPO plan just says put in bike lanes, and that's kind of vague. So I think in the future, we'd like to have a more context sensitive recommendations. Like maybe sometimes a side path makes sense. Like if it's Duke or Roxborough, having bike lanes probably isn't the best idea because of the volume and the speeds. So anyway, that's kind of a tangent, but historically what we've done so far is make sure that we get at least that 5 feet of width for a future bike lane. And I would argue that even if it's not connected to a bike lane system immediately. It's a nice extra piece of space there. So if you are cycling, you've got a little bit of room to get over sometimes to let cars pass you. But anyway, the other thing we often will look at is just intersections, like how hard is it to cross the road? Like if you've got this pedestrian generator across the street, like a shopping center, like how hard is it going to be to get from this development to get over there? Can we ask them to improve the intersection in some way to make it better for pedestrians to get over there? So that's something else we look at. And you know, a lot of times there won't already be a crosswalk. They might say, yeah, well, we can't do it because XYZ, you know, that's fine, but we do ask. And we look at sidewalk ramps just to make sure that, again, the ordinance will require this to some extent, but we will ask now if we think it's going to provide a better product. Let's see what else we got here. And then transit access, we look at where the bus stops are or could be. That's a good segue. I'll kind of go back to the development plan here. We saw that there was a bus stop down here and a pad for a shelter, but the shelter wasn't there. So one of the things we asked for was like build the shelter and make sure you build a sidewalk that makes it easy to get to it. Because right now it's kind of hidden away down here. And like, what good is it if you build this high density apartment complex and you have to like walk all over the place to get to it? So those are the things we try to think about. And then there's also a bus stop up here. It's not on their site, but we asked them, could you provide some kind of pedestrian connectivity to get to it? Like to build like a little bit of sidewalk here or here. They could say, no, it's not on our property. We're not going to do it. That's fine. But if it's within public right of way, they might be able to do it. And it would be a real advantage for all their residents if they could access this bus stop right here. I guess before I don't know if this would be a good place. Before I talk about some of the things we asked for on this development, does anyone have any questions so far? I've been kind of chatting away.
I had a couple of questions. For one, so for the bike lane width, there are some scenarios where you might not want it to be on road, right? Or like if it's high speed, Duke or Roxborough. But if it's not in what was the plan, the MPO's plan, right? Or is the
comprehensive transportation plan?
Yeah, the comprehensive transportation plan. Yeah, so CTP. If it's not in the CTP, do you think it's like, is there anything else we should consider before asking for a bike lane width anyways? If we feel like it could be a useful bike lane, but it's not in the CTP, is there a downside to asking for that width?
I mean, I think we've before, just to say, you know, it would be really good to have a bike lane or some kind of facility to get from here to here. They could say, well, it's not in a plan. Right. We're not going to do it. That's fine. But sometimes, you know, we'll make suggestions just and say, well, hey, you've got these apartments here. You got lots of people who are going to be walking around or biking to nearby facilities. You know, why not do this? It just to get that thought out there, like, hey, this is a good opportunity to do this. This is going to make this development really, really useful for a lot of people. But yeah, it helps if you've got like something in an adopted plan to fall back on. What I got on the screen right now is that comprehensive transportation plan. You can see it's cool. It also, the yellow does show where trails are supposed to go, but all these brown lines are bike lanes, and that's pretty much every street, every road. Not a lot of context specific recommendation there, which, you know, hopefully we can get in the future. And speaking of trails, that's something we also look at. We will say, hey, there's a trail corridor that goes through here. What are you going to do? Are you going to at least dedicate and reserve the land for it? Can you actually build part of it? Well, that's something else we'll ask about as well. Let me see if there's anything else in that checklist. I don't know, Dennis, if you had any other questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just have some sort of general thoughts. Again, just kind of thinking about like how hard or how strongly we should be pushing things like, well, first of all, I guess for bike lanes, again, just we ask for width, like do we have we ever historically gotten them to build like the bike lane? Like if there is a bike lane, to maybe add protection or anything like that, is building really like even worth asking for? Usually they say it's worth trying, it's worth asking, but have we had any success asking developments to kind of build any infrastructure?
So not just space for the bike lane, but also
Right.
like buffer and like those type, when you say that kind of infrastructure, like some kind of like vertical separation.
Yeah, exactly.
We haven't, I don't know if we've done it that much yet. Historically, we've kind of just focused on getting the space, not so much, but I think that's something that we need once we get, I think when the comprehensive plan gets updated, which I'll talk about in a minute, I think that will give us maybe some more policy thrust there to ask for things like that. And then when we get more context specific recommendations, like this street really should have some kind of protected facility, then that will really make it. Right now it's just kind of hard because there's not a lot of, the policy isn't very, it is in downtown Durham tier and I forget the name of the term. It's like development downtown is one of them, but it's like where the transit stops are supposed to be, design tiers.
Design, yeah.
They have really specific recommendations for that type of thing, but outside of that, it's kind of vague, unfortunately, right now.
Javiera says in the chat, push all the proffers. So which I don't know what exactly that means, but it sounds like something I'd like. So
Just ask for what you want.
Right.
Because
Yeah,
right now
okay,
we
okay.
just
Yeah,
see the
yeah.
asphalt. We just see that extra 10 feet of, extra asphalt that they're going to put in. That's what I see most consistently, is like the extra bit of asphalt that they're going to put there to put in a bike lane, right? So that there's the space for it. But I mean, we've seen folks dedicate parts of a trail. They've built it.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously the easement for a trail has happened quite a bit, but they've also built actual trails, like the part that goes through their property, or they'll do something adjacent to the property or connect to it if they can through their, or they'll have open space and say it, even though it's in a private neighborhood, it's public, right? So folks get a lot of interesting things. And I certainly like it when I get a package. Like I vote for a lot of the development that pisses off a lot of people, but if it's got a lot of stuff that people have ponied up that is like way beyond what the UDO requires, then what I say is it dictates to the next project that they got to meet that, right? Like you get more because people, right? So it's not great because it's not comprehensive the way like the comp plan is going to be and what we're going to be able to put in the updated UDO, which is coming as soon as the comp plan passes.
Right.
But it does at least get us more than what we would be getting otherwise.
Right. And I guess
Dan,
that's
if I can add one thing, kind of along the lines of what Javier was talking about. So when I was previously on BPAC, I did serve on DevRep. And one of the things that we kept in mind is we're an advisory commission and we advise the council and the county commissioners. And if the plan requires a zoning change, then we have some leverage because we're going to put asks in there, and it's going to be up to the council, if it's a city property, to approve that zoning request. They don't have to, they're not required to approve a zoning request. And if we put an ask in there, that gives information to the council on what they can basically negotiate, as Javier was talking about, with the developer. If you want your zoning change, then what are you going to do for us?
Yeah. And that's a good segue to kind of like where this goes. We make these comments, they go into the planning department's website and they get shared with the applicant and there's back and forth, but ultimately all that information gets carried forward. First it goes to the planning commission, they look at it, they make a recommendation, but ultimately, yeah, it goes to the city council or the county commissioners. And I'm not sure how many of these comments make it through, but
Y'all's stuff gets added in our packet, but what I see consistently is just that added asphalt. Like I don't see, I see some things around trails if there's stuff, right? I've seen a lot of dedication to like higher, commitments to impervious, to lowering impervious surface on a site, to more dedicated open space, to like more buffers. Sometimes people will put in like space for a bus station, even if there's not current bus service.
Right.
But if y'all have a conversation internally, right, about the things that you want, and specifically because I know we are moving to like more protected lanes, right? So, it might be worth, I think y'all have done a great job. Like your comments are consistently in our packet. I consistently see dedicated asphalt, like all the time. That is not something that is not routine. Like it's pretty typical to see it. And we've got the dedicated, I guess it's 10 extra feet. Sometimes what we're seeing now is because NCDOT wants a multi-purpose path. That is what we're seeing besides the dedicated bike lane. We're seeing this dedication of space for a multi-purpose path, and sometimes built pieces of it, right? One thing that has changed is it used to be that you were only in charge of the sidewalk in front of your immediate thing. Now you're in charge on both sides of the street, right? So that was an update I think we made 2 or 3 years ago. Sometimes developers will proffer, there's a gap in a sidewalk, like you were sharing earlier, between this development and this development. Can you proffer and connect, make that connectivity? So if you all end up getting a little bit more, in the weeds, or wanting to think through some of the extra things you all could, I'm just going to be really candid. Most of our development cases are 4-3. Right? Like they're barely passing right now. So it is an opportunity. I mean, we're getting a lot right now because of that, because it's not one of us flips, that it fails, right? And so it's one of the reasons we're seeing some pretty robust proffers from developers, because they are feeling that tension. So it might be the opportunity to think through over the next few months. Are there more things? And happy to, I know we're staying, happy to meet with y'all separately or to come and think through. That would be a good reason to talk to Alexander. What are some things that maybe what planning things you all could be asking for? Especially because it's all infrastructure. So you all asking for infrastructure is real different than when we get into like the affordable housing and public school proffers. Those are different, and really even planning commission, in my opinion, shouldn't be asking for that, because that gets into like the way you ask can get you into trouble. Like we're not legally allowed to say and we don't, right? I can't vote no because somebody didn't offer me affordable housing. I can say no if we ask them for a sidewalk thing that they didn't do. Right. Like that is totally allowable. So it might be when y'all do have that sit down with Alexander, thinking through where are some things that maybe you all want to start asking for some more, because, and then kind of cue to me, what is it that you want? County commissioners don't see the same level of zoning, because once we unified the planning department and the changes at the General Assembly, that kind of changed how a lot of this works. Most of the zoning comes before us.
Right. That's I'm glad you brought that up, because I guess we should be maybe a little bit more assertive and than what we've asked for in the past. And I think when the comprehensive plan and the UDO get updated, I think that's going to give us more to fall back on, because the comp plan now it's a little bit more nebulous, but the one that's in the works now has got a lot of policies with a D next to them, which means development impact. And there's a lot of those we can say, hey, this to make this really comply with this and this and this, do this. So I think all that together, I think is going to be a good opportunity in the future.
Yeah. So yeah, look forward to other conversations, and I really like asking them for things. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, that's good, because I think I know I've kind of gotten a little bit jaded in I guess I can say. I just because I've seen so many things not happen. I'm like, oh, why am I? What's the point in asking for this? So I think that's good to hear, that we just need to keep thinking about our role as an advisory commission, and how to make these developments work better for transit riders, pedestrians, and cyclists, and make sure that our policies get followed. I guess what I could do real quick here is I can show you what we ended up asking for on this particular development. And I'm sorry, I don't know, Dennis, I don't know if I'm running over time.
Yeah, just a few more minutes, I think,
okay.
And then we'll move on. Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. guess, we asked for a mid-block crossing to get from, as as you might remember, there's a big shopping center right here to get some kind
Which one is this one?
This is Summit, Durham Summit.
Okay, yeah. When is it coming to us? Do you know?
I'm not sure. This is the first round, so it may be a
It's gonna
while
be a
till,
little while. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they usually go through maybe 2 or 3 rounds before it goes to the commission. I guess it depends, but if it's not expedited. But so we're trying to see if there's some way to get some kind of faster pedestrian connection here in Fairfield Road. There's private property here, so that might be a stretch, but we asked for it anyway. This is where we kind of deviated from the CTP, the comprehensive transportation plan, and asked for, minimum 12-foot wide, like side paths on both of these streets here, because it's Duke and Roxborough. Bike lanes aren't ever going to be put in there. Probably shouldn't be because of the volume and the speed. So we've asked for them to consider that. Let's see, what else did we do? And we provided an example of how that might look from Raleigh's Unified Development Ordinance. Another thing we asked for, which you wouldn't think about something we would ask for, but there's a street here called Retta Road, and then there's a street here. What's it called? It's called it's Pacific Avenue. Just make sure they align. If not for motorists, for cyclists and pedestrians, because there is a road right over here that would be a really good way to bike to get down to the Stadium Drive trail. But getting there, it's just asking them to think about kind of more of a grid-like street system. They could say, no, we're not going to do that, but we thought we would ask. And then I already mentioned that the bus shelter down here at this corner, that make sure that they build a shelter and they make it so that a pedestrian can get to it without having to walk way out of their way. And lastly, it was the other bus stop I mentioned up here at the Duke and Fairfield, providing some kind of pedestrian connection to that. So that, those are the kinds of comments that we typically make on these. But yeah, so I mean, definitely, we meet usually the first Thursday of the month, sometimes the second Thursday if we have more spillover material to cover. But I don't have any background in planning. I just learned this stuff as I went along. Learned a lot from Dale over the years and from other BPAC members. And it's a lot of times I just want to know like what's going on, and this is a good way to get some information, like, oh, this is what they're doing there, because you'll see new stuff going up all over the place. I'm like, what's that about? But I'm like, yeah, we saw the site plan for that. We kind of know what's going on. So if nothing else, it's a good intelligence as to what's going on. And not everything we ask for happens, but sometimes it does. And in the world of advocacy, you might get kind of like, oh gosh, this takes years and years and years. But this is, it's a chance to perform advocacy, and you see some results usually sooner rather than later. Because I go around town and say, oh yeah, that's the sidewalk connection we asked for back 5 years ago. That's the trail connection we asked for. It's there. I can kind of like point out, like, yeah, this is stuff that we asked for that probably wouldn't have happened if we didn't push for it. So I would encourage everyone who hasn't already attended the meeting to check it out. And I think it's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, my bandwidth has been really, really restricted. I can't spend as much time with it as I used to. But the more eyes, the better. Fresher eyes. Like I said before, I'm getting a little bit jaded. I'm just like, but I think some fresh perspectives will be really, really helpful. Sorry if I've run over time, but are there any other questions?
Any questions for Dan? I'll make a point as well while seeing if anyone else has any questions. Some of the discussion here has kind of framed it a little bit differently for me. Maybe it is sort of another way we can think about our reviews more than just as kind of piecemeal sort of analyses of different sort of factors, right? Like the frontages and the intersections and all that. But it's also kind of what would make BPAC excited about this development. I think that's something that we can, because I think that's kind of what is implied by what Javier is saying as well, is if we feel like this development doesn't help Durham, or if there are some conditions under which it would help Durham, maybe there's, if it's, we can't probably speak directly to the like housing density, maybe. I mean, we could probably speak to it if we wanted to, but maybe our role is to sort of, whether or not we believe it's like even if say the housing density, we're not sure, we may not speak to that. We may be able to say, well, let's make sure that at least this serves the neighborhood by making, like, adding a cycle, like you're talking about, connecting these two roads and making sure that there's a cycling connection through there, and just kind of another way to frame it, and maybe another sort of way to attract folks to who aren't sure what they can do at a DevRev meeting. It might just be like, like, do you like this development? Is it what would make it so that you were excited about seeing this development come to fruition? And if there is a condition like that, let's proffer that and see what we can get. And we might not get it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's as long as it's within the bike pedestrian transit realm, then it's worth asking for it and looking at it in that lens. I agree.
I'll drop in. This is the link that Lisa Miller sent me. Thanks to, by the way, to folks. I know we've been kind of going back and forth with Lisa Miller, but regarding the comprehensive plan that was just mentioned earlier, if there's I can drop it to panel to attendees as well if they want to open a Q&A. But there are some opportunities to engage. May 23rd is the Planning Commission is holding a public hearing. So this is the comprehensive plan. Dictates what the UDO update will involve and entail, and then that dictates what is required of developments. So we try to sort of augment what the UDO already requires, but it's all the better if the UDO just requires more, right? Or has better requirements of new developments. So these are all kind of two sides of the same coin, just comprehensive planning, UDO, and then our development review process. Any questions for Dan? Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you going through that. And I think, yeah, yeah, these are like, I mean, we could spend sessions, I don't know. I think that we didn't have too much time, but just diving into the details of these plans is always really interesting. And they are things that will happen soon, for sure, right? So we'll see the sort of impacts of these sooner than later.
Yeah.
So if I might make just one point in general, and that is, it takes a concentrated effort to look at a plan. A lot of times it doesn't take a tremendous amount of time, but you really have to sit down and go through it. And the problem is that we need a reasonable number of people to do that. It's just, and it's a little bit difficult to make sure that we get the important ones, the ones that might have a big impact, without looking at all of them, because it isn't always obvious.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, it would help to have more eyes, because I think some stuff has slipped through our fingers. I just haven't had the chance to kind of see what's there and see which ones we need to focus on, and then get them out in time before the meeting for people to kind of look at them. So extra hands would help.
That's one thing too. I put it under the new business, but if there's anyone who is interested in seeing some of the plans when they come through to us, I can add you on the email listserv. So definitely would love all eyes on them. And that's the one takeaway that I have is this is a unique opportunity. BPAC actually does have power to be able to do this. There have been developers who actually reach out and say, hey, I didn't see comments. Do you guys have comments? Because I want to make sure that this gets passed and we don't get pushback. So yeah, I think having as many people that can look at these so we don't miss any, and we can really do what we can with them.
Yeah, that never used to happen, where applicants used to say, well, I haven't seen BPAC's comments yet. And it used to be like, I'm glad they haven't, let's keep it moving, let's keep it moving. But yeah, that's true. They've been asking for it. So that's good.
So I have a question. What's the difference between DevRev's role and staff's role? I would think that city transportation staff would be reviewing these things and, evaluating them on the same criteria. And, are they missing stuff? I mean, I'm on DevRev, so I sort of know the answer already, but to me, I've always sort of been scratching my head like, all right, well, if we don't find something, does that mean nobody else is going to find it? Or should there be somebody who's getting paid to do this? Should they be doing it? And we're just kind of double checking, or, I don't really understand what the relationship is, or what the division of responsibilities is.
Dan, would you put the case number in the chat? Because I can try to pull up the box.com just to like show what the other submissions look like.
Okay, let's see if I have it handy here. Of course I don't. Let's see, I'll just look at the emails here. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, there are staff that look at these development plans as well. And I guess I've always thought our role was to just, kind of catch what they didn't catch. And, from our perspective as advocates, I'm still looking for that.
It does make you wonder though, right? We just see the development plan, right? We don't kind of make comments based on others' comments.
Yeah, and maybe arguably, maybe we wait until the second review comes around. And then we make comments. I guess in the past, I always thought we had to get the comments in right from the beginning, but you could argue that just let staff do their first round of comments, and then we come in and say, oh, okay, well, no one talked about this. That we kind of just, fill in the cracks, as it were. That's one way to think about it.
And this is, I mean, Scott, I think it's the critical question. And I think we want to ask Alexander that as well.
Yeah.
When we have him on, because I think, how can we really efficiently supplement the existing work going on? Because right now it's kind of like we're reading these from scratch, trying to think of what could possibly be forgotten. And yeah, I mean, yeah, so I don't know what they do and what their process is. If anyone here knows, I guess feel free to chime in.
Scott, when I served on DevRev, and again, this is almost 10 years ago, it was really presented to me that we were an accessory to the transportation department, that they were going to focus mainly on the things that are required, and that we were more focused on kind of the optional things, the things we wanted that they weren't mandated or required to do. The other thing that was stressed to me is this was the little picture that we could make a difference. It's very difficult if we wanted to change, let's say, a city policy or a city requirement. We could advise the council on that, but this is something on a small scale where it's easier to accomplish something than to try and change the comprehensive plan. And the third thing is, this was something that Dale McKeel said several times during meetings, is go around Durham and look at all the developments where there's a missing sidewalk, and you think to yourself, gee, they should have built a sidewalk there when they put this building up, or they should have changed this intersection. This is our opportunity to prevent those problems from happening in the first place.
Yeah, but when I was on DevRev the last time, we were looking at site plans, not development plans. And so if somebody put in what was required, but it wasn't optimal, like maybe they put in a bike rack, but they put it in a really bad spot, or maybe they had a sidewalk, but it didn't connect to the front door very well, and we gave an alternate routing or something. But when you're doing a development plan, it's more pie in the sky, and you're kind of looking at these bigger plans. I mean, and so I kind of understand what the role is if we're the only ones doing it, but well, the site plans, it was easier to, they have to follow the UDO. It was more just like a qualitative thing, whether they were doing it in the best way or not. In this case, I know Dan sort of outlined the checklist and look at the comprehensive transportation plan, look at the, this, that, whatever. And I just don't know whether anybody else is looking at those things, has the same checklist and we're looking at them, or whether we're doing something that nobody else is doing, or whether there's a way to divide and conquer that makes us more efficient and makes them more efficient. And just I don't quite understand how the
you know, how all that is supposed to work. And so maybe if we talk to Alexander, you know, and he can help tell us what he does and where he needs the help, and, you know, here's where the handoff spots are. I mean, I think that will be helpful.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think once the comp plan gets updated, I think that's gonna be a good time to talk with them. Like, what are you guys focusing on and what should we focus on? They're gonna specifically mention all these policies that have a development impact. You know, I'm still trying to get my head around how that's gonna work. But yeah, I think that's a good conversation to have with Alex. And transportation too.
Yeah. Dan, did you have what was the code you dropped in?
Oh,
for?
sorry. Yeah, Hannah, that was the development plan. That's the code for it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to show or.
Just like what's in
Because it's-
box.com, like what all the different departments.
Yeah,
If there's
Do you
time,
want
that's fine.
okay.
Yeah, you can just share your screen for a minute while I read Mary Rose's question, Hannah.
Okay.
Mary Rose wanted to throw in here. She says, I realized the BPAC feedback was already submitted. I actually don't know if it was yet, Dan, but I had an idea for the Retta/Pacific Avenue request for connectivity. An option that could let them still build apartments in that specific area would be to make a tunnel-like structure on the ground level and build apartments above it. The tunnel would allow pedestrians and cyclists to go straight through, but not vehicles. Usually these types of developments don't have detailed plans at this point, so it could be something they could incorporate in the design.
Right. So they could build on top of it, basically. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess I don't know, Hannah. I guess we've already submitted them, but I mean, there's going to be another round. It's not like
Exactly.
it's.
We
not
were
like,
kind of
yeah.
we were kind of late in submitting it for the first round. We were late, and so we'll have the second round.
Right, and that could be an opportunity to, because if they come back and say, yeah, we can't realign these streets because of it's going to impact our building envelope, then that would be a good time to say, well, hey, this is another option. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary Rose.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So on box.com, there's a comment sheet. So they have like all of the different supporting documents for whatever zoning map change or whatever it is. And so as BPAC, since we have the opportunity to be able to put comments in, we actually have, so also like on each development, I guess it depends who needs to be involved with it, but each department is able to put in their own comments. So there's like the planning, and then engineering and water management, transportation. Erlene, she's the one who does it. And as Jeffrey mentioned, she kind of looks at mostly the things that have to be there. So she looks at the UDO, that's like her Bible, and then also looks at some of the other pieces and just makes comments according to that, but isn't really able to add like, oh, you should, change where this sidewalk is or anything along those lines. And
it sounds like the city is, sorry, Hannah, it sounds like the city's not able to speak beyond what's required. Is that fair to say? Like they're not allowed to say we'd prefer X if it's not written in policy.
At least right? From how I've seen it, how it's been kind of discussed. Yeah. And so then there's like the public schools and Parks and Rec, and we have a space. I think DOS actually used to have a space as well, but because it wasn't active, I guess it got removed. So
that's weird.
Yeah, so Alexander actually said, he was like, please make sure you guys do stay active, because you want to make sure that you're able to keep this power kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
well, I guess that just the UDO does call out BPAC DOST. I think the Environmental Affairs Board is having the authority to look at these things. So just wanted to point that out. That's the UDO actually gives us all these commissions the authority to do that. So
yeah, maybe we could communicate with DOS to see if they can.
Yeah,
check out our trails. Yeah, we talked about that. Right?
Yeah, we reached out to them a few years ago just because we wanted to get them to have joint comments and kind of get them engaged, but it just wasn't a lot of there just wasn't a lot of interest at that time. I think they were kind of overwhelmed. They just thought it was, I don't know, it just, they just didn't, they didn't get involved with that. So it's always worth kind of going back again and maybe that we can join forces on some of these things.
Yeah. Even just putting it on each other's calendars might be a good start.
Yeah.
Okay, any final thoughts for Dan or questions? Thanks again, Dan, and everyone chiming in.
You're welcome.
All right, let's zip along here. I think we're gonna be all right. We have some empty slots in the next few sections. So for the committee reports, so Suzanne couldn't make it today. Happy birthday to her. Remotely, I guess. It's Triple E. I don't know if she didn't mention to me anybody that was going to take her place to give the Triple E report. Does anyone have any updates from the Triple E meeting? I just have one. I can add one thing, but I wanted to leave it to anyone who was able to make the meeting, if there is anyone.
This is Ed. I was in the meeting, and the one thing that I recall we talked briefly about was follow-up from the April presentation by Emily from Parks and Rec. We had some talk about the June 10th American Tobacco Trail, Year of the Trail celebration event. And I've got some information about that I can share either now or when we do community updates.
Feel free now, Ed. I don't see any reason to wait.
Sure. So if you'll recall, Emily said that on Saturday, June 10th, Parks and Rec is going to be highlighting the American Tobacco Trail, the entire length of it. I guess they have jurisdiction over the trail, and they're going to be having events stationed up and down the trail on various topics. And one of the things that she mentioned was going to be there was a station on pet etiquette for the trail. And I saw that as an opportunity to chime in that maybe they should have something focusing on service animals. And they seem to have liked that idea. I spoke with Emily today. I've been sort of swapping phone calls with folks there. But I did speak with Emily today, and they have set aside a location at mile 0.0, which, as it turns out, is not the beginning or the end of the trail, oddly enough, but somewhere that she said near Blackwell Street, where they have pinpointed a BPAC presentation or table. That's how they characterize it as of today. And I asked them, are you referring to the service animal education thing that I mentioned? And she said, yeah, that's what we anticipate doing there. So they are incorporating that in their public outreach and PR and such. I have been, prior to today and today, just trying to rally some other resources to sort of go along with that. And I've got the organization in Raleigh, the North Carolina's PNA for Protection Advocacy firm for people with disabilities, Disability Rights North Carolina, is going to be providing some handouts, brochures and such. They also have stickers that are available for business owners to put in their window, just highlighting, service dogs welcome or something like that, which they're willing to distribute. They're going to ask people to scan a QR code, and then that'll give the scanner information about DRNC and about service animal laws and regulations, and they'll mail out a sticker. I also reached out to the Seeing Eye up in Morristown, New Jersey. That's the guide dog school where I got my Seeing Eye dog Gifford, and mentioned this event to them, and they're sending me a box load of stuff that we can use to give out, ranging from Braille bookmarks to magazines and service animal regulation information sheets, a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm excited about that. That's at no cost. They're happy to do that. And then I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago down at NC State, where I met a woman who works for an organization that raises and trains puppies to be medical alert animals. And she's interested in coming out possibly to talk to people about service animals for purposes other than guide dogs. I'm happy to talk about guide dogs and stuff. In any event, it just seems to be a thing. I wasn't sure whether this was something that BPAC was, going to sort of take under its wing. I would love it if it did, and we could use the new table, something like that. But if anyone else would like to get involved in that, it just seems like, a month ago when it first came up, it seemed like a good opportunity. And now it seems like it's really a great opportunity to get some information to people, educate people about service animals and, how to interact with them when you do encounter them out on the streets or on trails. So, but one other thing, I know BPAC has a little money left. I just think giving away stuff is a great way of sort of getting people hooked and engaged and stuff. So when I talked to the Seeing Eye earlier today, I asked them about, say they have these plushy guide dogs that they sell up there. As a graduate, I get them for $8 a piece. And I just figured, for kids coming up and down the trail on June 10th to be able to, this is a German Shepherd. It's got a little bandana. It says the Seeing Eye on it. They have other breeds, golden retrievers and Labradors and stuff. But anyway, I want to have a bunch of those to give away to kids that day. So if we're looking to spend a little BPAC money, that might be a thing. So I'm really thrilled that they've embraced this, that Parks and Rec has embraced this. And I'll be out there with my dog and maybe some others from my family and others from the service animal community. So excited about that. Any questions or anything? I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, I think what I'll do is I'll send an email just to see if anyone is able to volunteer. I don't know what it means for VPAC to take it officially under its wing, but I think we're happy to do what we can. I don't know, Hannah, about the table, but if we can, I'll be in town and able to help too on the 10th, so I can sort of
I can
coordinate
definitely
maybe.
help too. So
okay. Ed, if you need anything specific from us, I mean, we'll talk about the plushies. I don't see any reason why we couldn't do something like that. We can talk about those, but yeah, just feel free. Maybe I'll send an email after, and Ed, you can just let me know if there's anything specific, and we'll see if anyone on BPAC can volunteer as well. I'll send an email out.
I think it really ties in neatly to what BPAC is all about, Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission. There are a lot of people, not just people who are blind, out and about town with guide dogs and other types of service animals. And the way infrastructure, pedestrian infrastructure, especially in transportation, public transit are impact us. I think there's a really neat fit for this to be a BPAC sponsored event. So
sounds like they named the table after us already, right? So,
well, that's all they had. I asked her, like, what do you have on your calendar for it? She said BPAC at mile 0.0. And I said, well, maybe you could also put in there BPAC service animal education or service animal information. And she said, okay, we'll do that. So
that's great. Yeah, thanks, Ed. That you're absolutely right. Definitely aligns with what we care about here. And thanks for championing that. It sounds like you've taken on, I don't know if you asked for it that much, but you've definitely taken on a lot. We appreciate it.
Seemed like it made sense when she brought that up a month ago.
It did. It definitely does. Definitely does. And you said mile 0 is around Blackwell. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what she said. Blackwell and maybe something like Moorhead. I'm not all that familiar. But
yeah, I'll check that. Thanks.
I think it's the intersection just up from the ballpark.
It's pretty convenient then,
I can add, I want to mention the couple speakers we had come into Triple E too last week, which were very good. Layla Horton with Bike Walk NC came in and talked about the Friendly Driver program, which I thought was really good. Just trying to be a courteous driver and understand to be aware of bikers and cyclists out there. Thought it was a really good presentation. And then Amber Taylor from Durham County Department of Public Health came in to talk about healthy mile trails. And, there might be an opportunity there to get involved as far as installing some of the healthy mile trails later on. I think she was just going to do her first install this week or next week. I can't remember what the date was, but she said she would get back in touch with us and give us details on how that works and if anyone could get involved, but we can spread the word on that. And then I know Suzanne was working on a summary for the walk audit, the neighborhood draft. She had a lot of pictures pulled out and summaries of that. We're trying to polish that up before it's presented to the full commission, but that should be coming up too.
Yeah, I meant to review that as well, and I haven't had a chance. So hopefully for next month we can show it to
It was
the
neat to
commission.
see that those two women connect with one another. I think they found it to be fortuitous that they were both there and seemed to see opportunities to continue interacting with one another. So that was pretty
Yeah.
cool.
That's good. I mean, that's a good role for our commission too. Put two people together that wouldn't have had a chance to talk otherwise. Yeah. Thanks all. Anything else for Tripoli? All right. Hannah dropped in a couple links to everyone regarding the Great Trail Day, and then the presentation, the NC Friendly Driver Program presentation with Layla. Or I guess a link to the resources for that presentation. Oh, and also Hannah reiterated the comp plan final public hearing for the Planning Commission for the comp plan is May 23rd, and the Joint City Council County Commissioner public hearing is August 31st. So kind of summer gap there, but just so everyone's aware of the comp plan dates specifically. All right, Dan with DevRev.
Not much to add, and we looked at that Durham Summit Development Plan, which we all looked at just a few minutes ago, provided the comments that we discussed. And then just a little bit of a wrap-up conversation about the comprehensive plan and just some conversations with Lisa Miller at Planning about, some of the policies, if it would be possible to add a few more, but I know that you, Dennis, and Mike have had a lot of input on that over the past month, but it was kind of that, just sort of rounding out the final, I guess, questions about that. I think that was pretty much all we covered this month. I don't know, Mike or Dennis, if there's anything else.
We also looked at the site on Stadium Drive and Chalk Level Road.
Oh, that's
the
correct.
site that has only one entry point.
Yeah, and that was one it's a text only development plan, but I'm still going to follow up with Aaron Kane at Planning to see if there's anything that we can do about that. Like I said before, those are the kind of development plans we can't really comment that much on, but maybe it's more like a textual plan now. But that's your, thanks for bringing that up. That's one that we'll follow up on.
Yeah, nothing else for me. I guess for the Lisa Miller point, I guess maybe this is kind of pie related, but it was mentioned. So there's been some back and forth because we were trying to get our input for the comp plan sort of iterations, as much input as we could. And she did, I think we kind of made the our last comments at the last second, small comments, and she did reply to those. I think some folks got it via the reply she sent, but the whole commission hasn't seen that. So I'll send that out tonight or tomorrow, just so the whole commission can see what the kind of final results of that back and forth with Lisa was. FYI. Maybe that's a transition then to Michael Mormon with.
Well, actually, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make this meeting, so I asked Dan to cover it, and he's pretty much covered it all. So we'll save you some time.
Perfect. Yeah. I was slotting in short pie updates. So that's good. But no, yeah, you're as for those who, I guess Jeffrey maybe is the only one who doesn't know, Pi and DevRev hold their meetings together because we have such a lot of overlap on who sort of does DevRev and does Pi stuff. So those meetings are usually held at the same time these days. Javiera, maybe with City Council, I know you have some updates.
Hi, everyone. So last night, Wanda Page presented her proposed budget. I'm not sure who all paid attention, but there are lots of pretty amazing things in there, including $10 million for new sidewalk repairs, the Vision Zero coordinator. I know Bike Durham sent out like a little news flash this morning that listed it all in one, because we have it in several different places, because some of it's in the CIP, some of it's in the Green and Equitable CIP. Merrick Moore, Bragtown, and I forget which other historically disinvested neighborhood is getting a lot of new sidewalks. We're putting $10 million into the Fayetteville Street corridor, which will also include updated sidewalks and trees. And we are keeping buses and access fare free. So I feel like those are all pretty big wins.
Yeah.
And that's not even,
They
there's
are.
even more in there. And then the other thing I wanted to share is that we are bringing both Go Durham and our access, that's our alternative transit system for folks who, have extra needs. All of that is getting moved out of Go Triangle. And so while it will be a separate contract, right? It's not that they're not city employees, they are their own separate employees so that they can maintain their union, essentially, bargaining rights, which we of course are not allowed in the state of North Carolina. So if we made them city employees, they would lose that right. So that is why we have separate contracts for them. Sometimes folks farm that out and it's worse for the worker, but that's not what's happening here. But basically, whereas before our transit operators had like essentially two middle management, right? With two organizations they had to manage or get through, right? Like now it's just the city of Durham. And that also means when we are doing, our updated bus routes, our updated, schedules, things like that, it's not going to have to go through Go Triangle. Like we will be in control of that. So those are all of my very big updates. And next week we have two kind of deeper dives into the budget. Certain departments will be presenting with more details versus kind of like the high level that Wanda presented last night, the manager page presented last night. And this doesn't necessarily have to do with BPAC, but it is something that a lot of folks were really interested in also happening. The HEART program within the city of Durham also has a massive expansion. We will be moving to citywide, not 24/7 yet, but to 12-hour citywide. And it's an additional, I think, 30 employees added to that department. Those are my updates.
Thanks, Javier. Yeah, thank you to you and to everybody who, I know a lot of folks in a lot of different roles pushed for the various changes. Yeah, not just the bike and ped related ones, but a lot of great stuff there. Yeah, sometimes we put a lot of work in and we just kind of pass through the accomplishment. Hopefully everyone's kind of taking this as a kind of great step. Yeah, I'm certainly happy to see it after on this commission. We put a fair amount of work and a fair amount of thought into what we could sort of do to help as well. But yeah, it's exciting stuff. Let us know, Javier, if there's any next steps that we can help with. Obviously, if we're always sort of ready to fight the next fight.
Yeah, I think so far, and there was there's just a lot with like updated bike routes, neighborhood routes, certain things that got expanded. I know y'all are probably more aware of all the details than I am at this point, but I will try and remember to forward on things to the BPAC group so everyone can see. But it is some pretty substantive, I think, commitments from the city, both for bike and pedestrian projects. And then also, I'm really happy that we're bringing Go Durham back in house. It will help us kind of leverage that and make things smoother.
Yeah, it's really great.
And then one last thing, at some point, I sit on the subcommittee that's around the commuter rail, which we really should just leave not commuter rail. Like we should just call it some like regional transit or something.
Right.
And there are lots of updates happening there. There's a lot of moving parts. We were essentially not in the same place as Wake County around some of the things that they were wanting to do. But that is also shifting. And there has been some movement around kind of aligning ourselves better with our Wake County MPO counterpart, which is Campo. So that's been some pretty interesting developments. Kind of just more on the table about what needs to happen with BRT, that maybe commuter rail at this moment is not the best use of our dollars, that there still needs to be some pretty massive improvements along that corridor anyway, regardless of what's coming. If that's improved passenger rail between cities because of Amtrak, doesn't really matter. You're not going to get a lot of improvement because of especially a lot of the issues in Durham County. So that's the other kind of update that I have, and that's moving pretty quickly, and updates kind of shift around. So I'll try and remember to provide a better update around that when I have more accurate information.
Great. Yeah, that sounds interesting. We'll look forward to that.
This is Ed. I just want to add just the city taking over the Go Durham contract is also going to have, I think, a really positive impact on the potential for improving and expanding paratransit services as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think it's a good move, and my understanding is the contract, the drivers are getting pretty substantive raises. There's just a lot of incentives is my understanding. I know more about the fixed route operator one than the access one. But there's been a lot of incentives built in to those contracts to ensure that like delivery of services is really like the bar is met, that efficiency and like on routes, and that they're coming quickly and they're meeting all of the targets. So that's the other piece that I found was really interesting from Sean Egan, is just sharing that we've incentivized a lot of it so that we get the best service delivery for residents, which I think then will encourage more folks to get out of their cars and get on the free bus.
Yeah.
that was a concern that Sean expressed. I can remember, like, shortly after he took on the role of director of transportation, he was really concerned that the contract back then didn't provide incentives to make the system work better. So I bet he's happy.
He is. Oh, and it's a French company, which I found was hilarious because they're used to unions doing what they're going to do there. And I'm very pro-union, so it's fine. So it's just like, oh, they're used to like, folks really taking this seriously in the way we don't labor rights in this country. So that I also thought that was good.
That's funny. All right. Just a quick catch up on the chat. Heidi sounds awesome. Javiera Jeffrey says excellent news on Go Durham remaining fare free, and Brian co-signs with some applause. And then I think Hannah dropped in a link to the Ride of Silence. Sounds like I think we'll get to that, I'm guessing, at the announcements and updates. Heidi with Board of County Commissioners, maybe we can move to you next.
Yeah, one thing Javiera didn't mention that I was really taking note of is that there's no tax increase with all of these investments that the city's making. So that's pretty cool, Javiera.
It's just because we're growing that quickly, Heidi. It's kind of scary, actually.
Well, our manager has a proposed 3-cent property tax increase, even with the same amount of significant natural growth. So I wasn't really going to. I wasn't really going to give a big update on the budget. I can at a very high level if you want, but I was going to mention the final draft of the Durham County Transit Plan is out there and has been for a while for public comment. It was presented most recently to the county at our May work session, and we will be voting on it next Monday night, May 22nd. And I expect we will approve it. And I think it has so many good elements in it. that you would approve of, I believe. It relies heavily on the community engagement that was done, in particular, really trying to reach out to current transit riders, and I think a very good job was done there. The key themes are improve the current system and more projects sooner, connect the region with quick and reliable service. That's the phrase that has been amended in the transit plan from commuter rail. They're now saying just, regional service that's quick and reliable. They're leaving that more open to give us some more flexibility at this point to delay our final decision about how that regional service will happen, whether it will be commuter rail or passenger rail or bus rapid transit or some combination thereof. And then also better experiences at stops and stations. And just to go a little bit more deeply around each of those areas, the plan includes funding to improve all Go Durham routes to come every 30 minutes or sooner, some routes coming every 15 minutes, service to run later at night, during the week and weekends, certain Go Triangle routes to come more often and run later at night, including the ones between Durham and Raleigh. More routes going more places, adds a new crosstown route. It sponsors van pools and adds Go Durham Connect micro transit zones. Faster, more reliable bus service. The plan includes projects to help buses stay on schedule, such as traffic signal improvements, bus only lanes, and a study for potential bus rapid transit. That is now funded in this new transit plan as a study for bus rapid transit. Lots of bus stop improvements and then new transit centers or renovations of transit centers are included. Accessible landing pads at all stops and many benches and shelters and signage and lighting and sidewalks at certain bus stops. And you're probably already seeing this all across town. And finally, includes Go Triangle and Go Durham Paratransit, which is the access service improvement study. So a study of how we can do paratransit better, including funding to implement the study results. And then there's a section that's outside of all these bus and sort of local improvements. There's a section on quick and reliable regional connections to figure out what our financial contribution is going to be to build and begin running either commuter rail between Durham County and Wake County, or to provide some other regional fast reliable service improvements. But a really important statistic to know is that 26% of the funding is going towards quick and reliable regional connections, and the rest is all for bus improvements, or enhancements, unless 6% for administration and accountability. But the vast majority, almost 3/4 of the funding is for service improvements that will benefit current transit riders. And so let's see if there's anything else. Just that, what's next is the Durham County will adopt the transit plan on May 22nd. And then it also has to be approved by the Go Triangle Board of Trustees on May 24th and the DCHC MPO on June 12th. So I thought you would be interested in that, and I could put the link to the actual plan in the chat.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great, Heidi. Thank you. That is exciting.
Sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, yeah, maybe when it's all wrapped up, this could be a good topic to kind of get a rundown of the final sort of what's in it, what all the details, and have a presentation at BPAC maybe, but that'll be, I guess, a few months.
It'd be great to have Ellen come. She is fantastic, our transportation director for the county, and she'd be happy to, I know.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Heidi. It's exciting. Yeah. All right, good news on multiple fronts today. For the Duke University, I know we don't have anyone there, so no updates for Duke. NC Central, I don't believe Jalen is in our meeting. Hannah, I guess any updates from Duke or NC Central that you know of?
No, this will be the third meeting that Jalen has missed. So we're gonna be trying to figure out how to remove and reappoint someone or appoint someone else. But besides that, no.
Got it. All right. With the comp plan, Ideal and Ed, or I guess Ed who is with us here. Any unmentioned updates regarding the comp plan?
No, only those that have been already mentioned. Oh, well, I will add, in addition to the May 23rd and August 31st. If anyone's interested in seeing all of the feedback that came from the last round of engagement and outreach, that's available on the Engage Durham comp plan site at this time. And that would likely include all of the work that you DevRev folks put in on the policies.
Yeah, it's a
Good
point,
job.
I think. And everyone, we had a lot of mission-wide votes, I think, on a few of those as well. Thanks, Ed. Any other community updates? I have a question from Mary Rose that I'll leave for the announcements and updates at the end. But any other community updates? I know, Ed, I guess you already mentioned yours. Anything else from anyone?
I have a quick announcement.
Sure.
For kicks. I'll share that Benjamin Rizzuto scored 100 on his AP government senior project. He did a report on the Durham Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission. So
wow,
proud of that.
Good for him. You know, we have positions open, Ed.
That's impressive.
I've actually, maybe.
I would say the only other update that's a community level is the Rite of Silence is tomorrow night.
Right.
I sent an email that John had actually sent out as an email blast. I sent it to everyone so you can see more information there. But it's tomorrow night, 5:30 at CCB Plaza. It's going to be a 5-mile ride. It's going to be a slower pace, and it's honoring those who have died or been hit in motor crashes.
Yeah, encourage everyone who can make it out and give our support. Moving to old business. Yeah, so the festival for the Eno, Hannah, do you want to go over this? I also include July 1st and 4th when I send out an email for the Great Trail Day, which is in June. So we can have a kind of June and July volunteer opportunities email. So you all will get a chance to kind of opt into this. But Hannah, is there anything you want to add for the festival for the Eno? Or
there's just the opportunity to table with Bike Durham. I believe Bike Durham though is having a hard time recruiting volunteers, so I'm not sure that they're going to be tabling. It is going to be a pretty busy weekend, so and we should let them know sooner rather than later, but it is going to be where we would be able to table for free, so that's kind of nice. But I think, yeah, just volunteering might be hard to recruit more people that weekend.
I'm guessing it'll be hard to recruit, but I will send the email out tomorrow, and maybe folks can just give a reply as soon as they can about whether they'll be available around that July 4th time period. If we happen to have numbers, I guess we can opt into that. Maybe end of this week is okay, Hannah? Is that, you think, too late? Or
Yeah, I think that's fine. He had already said like 2 weeks ago was the deadline, but I think it'll be fine.
yeah, we didn't. It's July. We're just getting June together.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm gonna skip the upcoming presentation topics. We have the next few meetings booked already, anyways. If that's okay with folks, for the sake of time. Though maybe when the budget on the city side and the county side are finalized officially, we can have a rundown of those. That might be a good one. For new business, so yeah, you already mentioned this, Hannah, but just to reiterate, if folks want to be on the listserv to receive development plans, just let Hannah or I know, and we'll make sure that you get those. It's quite interesting. Yeah, even if you don't want to review them, you can at least see what's coming in and take a look and see what's getting built in Durham. It's interesting. Anything to add there, Hannah?
No, I would say if anyone's on the list and they don't want to be on it, you can also let me know. I think there's a lot of y'all that are on this call already on it, but anyone else and just let me know.
And then for June, I think we tend to have well, summer months are a little harder than other months to meet. Is there like maybe do multiple folks? I know Brian Hawkins can't make it to June 20th. Does anyone else know right now that they can't make it for June or June 20th? Yeah, that's the date of our next month's meeting. Okay, I think we'll keep that date then, if there aren't a lot of complaints. If it turns out there are, just email me and Hannah, and we'll have to make a decision soon about that. But for now, we'll keep June 20th.
I think we've skipped July.
Yeah, we are skipping July. I just remember I think we had to reschedule. Maybe it wasn't June. Anyway, I just wanted to double check. I know summer months, but yeah, I think so. July we won't have a meeting. We can revisit that next month if there's a reason we want to have a meeting, but for now we don't have a July slot. Okay. Heidi, by the way, linked in the chat the full plan, and Javier will be at the Right of Silence tomorrow. She's notifying us. Okay, just a few minutes left. Wanted to let Mary Rose sort of had a good point in here in her question. Let me make sure I'm not forgetting anything else. Yeah, I think so. I'll read Mary Rose's question. Not sure where this fits into your meeting agenda, but I wanted to ask before the meeting ended. With regards to existing bicycle infrastructure, if there are areas we know have regular safety issues, like 1105 West Main Street's bike lane being used as car parking spots. I think this is that Insomnia Cookies area, if I'm not mistaken. Is there anything that can be done to relieve this safety issue? I've tried reporting illegally parked vehicles, and it requires a call to the non-emergency police, which isn't convenient when you are already cycling down Main Street and there's a high likelihood that the vehicle will be gone by the time an officer arrives. I've also received hostility from people who are parked there while I ride by, so it wouldn't be a safe place to wait around for an officer to show up. My immediate thought would be to see if an officer or illegally parked or illegal parking ticketer type person could be at that location regularly, so that the cyclists don't have to go through the process of reporting individual violators each time. Yeah, that's a very fair point, Mary Rose. I don't know if does anyone, the question here, to be clear, is there anything that can be done to sort of make it so that the cyclists don't have to be the ones reporting the issues of cars parked in the bike lane, where we know this Insomnia Cookies and that Main Street area is someone got hit there, was it a month ago or so? So it's an issue there and in other places. If anyone has any thoughts on that, open that up.
I was wondering if Durham one call would be a place, because it's maybe that goes straight to the mayor.
I think Durham one call, the problem is that would be a way to like notify that this is an issue generally. I guess that wouldn't serve the need to like actually ticket somebody who's parked there in the moment. I'm guessing, right? Yeah.
No, just for the general problem.
Yeah.
I know a few people have taken it upon themselves, especially in the weeks right after Noah's crash, to just basically post up and call it in whenever somebody was doing it. But you're absolutely right. Most people park there for about 1 minute to 3 minutes. So it's very hard to get anybody there and actually catch anybody in the act. The system is set up very poorly to deal with that.
I think what we need to do is contact parking enforcement and ask for preemptive enforcement. Because as you said, I mean, calling it in when someone's parked there for 5 minutes isn't going to work. What we really need is them to proactively be there, and then I imagine they'd probably look to do warnings at first. Kind of like if you remember the Watch for Me NC program, something like that, but for that specific location.
Yeah, I think right immediately after the last crash, they had someone there, but that was something like a couple of days worth, just hoping it would get the message, which obviously it didn't. One of the things that came up in one of the discussions with, I think it was Eric Langfried, that he had been talking to someone about getting just a couple of vertical ballards put along that as enough of an obstacle that cars really wouldn't be able to pull off that maneuver. And I don't know where that went.
I mean, I'll throw in just because we're out of time. Well, for first, Mary Rose says she did try during one call and they told her to call the non-emergency number. Yeah. You know, Mary Rose, I know you come to our subcommittee meetings. If you want to kind of throw up like putting up bollards is a great idea, I think. I mean, if there's any way to get that done, I don't see why BPAC wouldn't just throw its weight behind that. If we could even get a kind of a blurb or some short letter, I think we'd be sort of willing to kind of work with that at a subcommittee meeting. Mary Rose, I know you've been active with us for a while, and if you want to put together a quick draft, we could take a look at one of our subcommittee meetings in the next month or two, and then maybe reach out to Eric and see, and then talk to parking enforcement. I mean, this is a kind of, yeah, we can kind of close the loop on this. It's pretty, seems like it's getting kicked around a little bit. But yeah, I'd be happy to go over this in a subcommittee meeting next month. Probably for Pi, DevRev. I know AAA has a lot already. All right. Any other thoughts on Mary's question or any other announcements or updates generally? Okay. Thanks, Mary Rose again. So communication priorities. Mainly, I'll reach out to Paul to get my email. We'll talk to Alexander Cahill about coming to our DevRev meeting in the next month, maybe, yeah, hopefully next month. And also we'll reach out for volunteer opportunities. We have the Great Trail Day that Ed will be at, and we have a couple possible options in July. Any other communication priorities that folks have that I didn't list? Oh, I'll also send out the Lisa Miller's response that she sent us about our comments.
One thing that I completely forgot to mention earlier was, so I found out just the other day that BPAC will get another $1,000 on July 1st. And so we have approximately $500 that we need to spend before June 30th. And so the thought was we need an updated banner. And so we could purchase that. We could also purchase a tablecloth because we need one of those. And then we would still have some money for stickers or maybe these, the seeing eye
Plushies.
dogs. Yeah, plushies. I almost called them fluffies. So yeah, plushies. But I think it would be good to start brainstorming now what we would want to spend the next money on, so we don't kind of get in a bind at the end of scrambling. So, but it's great news because I was very happy to hear that.
Yeah, that is good. We'll be able to pull some more materials, I think, and yeah, I'll sort of get that together. Maybe there's a design that we can use. I think we have some sketches of our new sort of design, our new logo, I guess. But yeah, plushies as well. If folks have ideas, feel free to email them. But I think we'll have a thread for more ideas for how we can spend our budget. And yeah, before June, we'll need to spend our $500. Okay. Anything else? Any final thoughts, concerns, updates?
Yeah, I was going to say the plushies, we need to, it sounds like have them on site by the 10th of June. So
yeah, that one's Ed, we'll talk to you about that after this.
I can turn them around quickly.
Great. Not hand sewing. Okay. Anything else, folks? All right. Thanks. We went a little over. Appreciate everybody sticking around. Yeah. Welcome, Jeffrey. Welcome back, I guess.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Have a good
Good night.
rest of your month.
Good, everybody.
Night.
Not at all.